The morning air carried the damp salt of the harbor, drifting in through the cracked window. 63 today. I sat on the edge of my bed for a moment, listening to the gulls call over the water, letting the sound wrap around me like a familiar shawl. My birthday used to mean Harold's cinnamon coffee, Landon's off-key singing, and neighbors stopping by with blueberry muffins still warm from the oven. This year, the celebration was hosted by Landon and Brielle, though in truth, it was in my own dining room when I came downstairs. I hardly recognized it. My warm oak table now sat under a pale linen runner, surrounded by sleek metal chairs that clashed against the old shiplap walls. The shelves where my chipped teacups once lived were bare, replaced with neat rows of white pottery bowls, all identical. The room smelled faintly of some boutique candle, nothing of cinnamon or lemon polish. Voices drifted from the hallway. I slowed, hearing Brielle's low tone. "She'll be out before the month's over." She murmured to a friend. "Landon's already talking to a realtor." The words hit like a cold wave, but I didn't stop walking. I'd learned long ago that sometimes the only power you have in the moment is to keep your face still. The guests, mostly Brielle's friends, stood with champagne flutes, chatting about weekend getaways and renovation plans. I took my place at the end of the table. Brielle's smile was wide, almost brittle, as she poured coffee into my cup without asking how I took it. I focused on the lemon cake in front of me, the one thing that still tasted like home. After the first forkful, I reached for another slice. Landon's hand shot out, sliding the plate away before I could lift it. "You've had enough, Mom," he said, a smirk tugging at his mouth. A ripple of laughter passed through the table, quick and knowing, though none of it reached my eyes. I set my hands in my lap, feeling the burn rise in my chest. Years of birthdays and Thanksgiving dinners in this room, and here I was, an afterthought in my own house. I folded my napkins slowly, smoothing the creases flat, already knowing I would remember this moment not for the cake, but for the silence I kept. I swallowed it down, the way you swallow the first mouthful of bitter coffee, and tucked it away with the others. The rest of the day would play out, but something in me had already shifted toward what came next. When Harold and I first walked through this place, it was nothing more than weathered shingles, uneven floors, and a porch sagging toward the earth. He saw potential. I saw a challenge worth loving. We spent the first summer planting rose bushes along the fence line, my hands in the soil while he balanced on a ladder, painting the shutters a deep forest green. By fall, the porch no longer creaked underfoot, and our first Thanksgiving here was loud, crowded, and perfect. Every board, every nail had our fingerprints on it, even the kitchen tile, laid one square at a time with music playing low and cinnamon rolls cooling on the counter, carried pieces of us. It wasn't just a house, it was a history you could walk through. Years later, when Landon asked if we could share ownership so he and Brielle could more easily get a renovation loan, I said yes. It felt like a natural step, keeping the house in the family, allowing it to grow with the next generation. We met with a lawyer, started the paperwork, but when it came to the final signature, I hesitated. I told Harold's old friend at the firm to hold it unsigned, just in case. Not because I imagined this, never this, but because some small voice inside me whispered that love doesn't always protect you from regret. That lockbox still sits in my bedroom closet, dented at one corner, with Harold's handwriting on the label. Inside, the deed waits unfinished, untouched. Over time, the home I knew began to shift. First, the family photographs in the hallway disappeared, replaced with oversized black and white prints of shapes I couldn't name. My reading chair under the bay window vanished one day, In its place stood a glass and steel shelving unit, holding nothing personal, only things that photographed well. The teacups from my mother were boxed up without asking, donated before I could even decide. Each change was small enough to overlook, until together they formed a map of erasure. I still walk these rooms knowing where Harold's hands once rested, but lately, I've begun to wonder if the deed in that lockbox might be more than a precaution. It might be the one thing they've forgotten I still hold. It started with the guest room, Brielle told me, all airy enthusiasm, that she'd been thinking about creating a dedicated yoga space. She gestured toward the room I'd used for years, its lilac wallpaper, the antique dresser Harold and I had found at a flea market. I agreed to lend it to her, thinking it would be temporary. 2 days later, my nightstand was replaced by a rolled yoga mat, and my books were stacked in a cardboard box at the top of the attic stairs. The attic was never meant for living. The ceiling sloped so sharply I had to duck in half the space, and the single window rattled in every strong gust off the harbor. I told myself it was just for a while, that families adjust and shift. But the truth was, I was being nudged upward, out of sight. The kitchen followed. There were more and more private dinners for Brielle's friends, complete with catered trays and carefully staged place settings, I was told, sweetly but firmly, to use the upstairs kitchenette on those nights, the one with the single electric burner and a fridge the size of a hotel minibar. One afternoon, after a walk along the shore to clear my head, I came home to find the door to the storage room locked. That room held what little I had left untouched photo albums, my mother's quilt, Harold's record player. I tried the handle twice, then knocked. No answer. Later, I asked Landon about it. He barely looked up from his laptop. Brielle's organizing. Some of that stuff's not really necessary anymore. That night, as I set my cup in the sink, I saw it, a glossy brochure lying open on the counter. Harborview Senior Living, your gateway to a worry-free retirement. The photo showed a smiling woman my age sipping coffee on a balcony that wasn't hers. I stood there for a long moment, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. They weren't just rearranging furniture or redecorating. They were making room by moving me out. I went upstairs to the attic, my head low under the beams, and thought about the lockbox in my closet and the unsigned papers inside. Something told me I'd be needing them sooner than I thought. That night, after the house had gone quiet, I pulled the step stool from the hallway closet and reached for Harold's lockbox on the top shelf. The dent in its corner caught under my fingers. The same dent it got the day we moved in, when Harold dropped it on the porch and laughed at himself. I carried it to the attic bed and turned the little brass key. Inside, beneath the birth certificates and Harold's old watch, lay the manila envelope I hadn't touched in years. I slid the papers free. The deed transfer, unfinished, looked exactly as it had the day I left it with our lawyer. My name filled the owner's line. The signatures incomplete. Stuck to the top page was a curling yellow sticky note. My own handwriting from 7 years ago. Do not sign if they treat you like a guest. I sat there for a long time, the paper warm under my hands, the ink crisp and certain. I'd told myself it was just a precaution back then, a safeguard I'd never need. Now it felt like a lifeline. The next morning, I called Carmen Vale. We'd met decades ago when she was still working as a paralegal for Harold's friend at the firm. She'd long since retired, but her voice over the phone was as steady as I remembered. Bring the papers, she said without hesitation. We'll have coffee. At her kitchen table, sunlight pooling across the wood, Carmen read every line, her glasses slipping down her nose. When she finally looked up, her eyes held no uncertainty. Legally, this house is still yours. Maribel, 100%. You never relinquished ownership. A slow, unfamiliar calm spread through me. It wasn't relief exactly. It was something heavier, steadier. Carmen leaned back, folding her hands. You could confront them today and be within your rights. But that's not the smartest move. I nodded. No, not yet. We talked for another hour, mapping what would need to be done, who to contact, what to gather. By the time I left, the plan wasn't written down, but it was already taking shape in my mind. I just needed to keep my face still and my steps quiet until the moment was right. I started small, the way you'd plant seeds you meant to keep secret. Each night, I wrote in a leather-bound journal, recording every slight, every shift in tone. Every time my name was left off a conversation about my own home, I dated each entry, noting who was present, what was said, and how it was delivered. The words became a map, a paper trail of the slow erosion they thought I wouldn't notice. 2 weeks in, I made an appointment at a clinic in the next town over, booking it under my maiden name. The nurse took my blood pressure, checked my reflexes, and ran me through a full cognitive assessment memory recall. Problem solving, comprehension, when it was done. The doctor smiled and handed me the report. No signs of impairment. Exceptional cognitive function. I folded the paper neatly into a file folder before I left. Back at the house, I retrieved Harold's old porcelain clock from the top shelf of the linen closet. Inside, nestled behind the clock face, I placed a small nanny cam I'd ordered online. Its field of vision covered the length of the dining room and part of the hallway, enough to catch what I suspected happened when I wasn't in the room. It didn't take long. A week later, I played back the footage to find Brielle perched at the table with 2 of her friends, reading my mail out loud in a sing-song voice. "Listen to this," she giggled, holding up an envelope from the bank. "Who even writes checks anymore?" They laughed, loud and careless, like the letters were some kind of parlor game. I downloaded the files onto a USB drive and labeled it Tax Receipts, 2017. Then I slid it into the desk drawer in the office, right under a stack of actual receipts, knowing no one in this house had the patience to go digging through them. By the end of the month, my journal was half full, the USB drive neatly organized, the medical report tucked into a folder marked Insurance. Every piece was in place. Now all I had to do was keep smiling and let them believe I'd already surrendered. It wasn't hard to make them think I was fading. I started leaving my keys in obvious places on the counter, next to the toaster, then finding them with a sheepish smile. I'd step into a room and ask, as if I'd forgotten, did I already make tea? Little things, harmless on the surface, but enough to confirm whatever narrative they were already telling themselves. The change in their expressions was subtle but clear. Brielle's voice softened into that syrupy tone she used with small children. Landon began explaining things twice, even when I didn't ask. I let them. Every time they thought I was slipping, I felt my footing get steadier. Meanwhile, Carmen was busy. Over coffee at her kitchen table, she slid a draft across to me, a full retraction of shared ownership, citing incomplete transfer, emotional coercion, and misuse of property. Attached was a 30-day notice to vacate. Her handwriting in the margins was neat and precise, the way she used to mark up legal briefs. At home, I started preparing in silence. I made a list of every account and service tied to the house, the bank where the mortgage was paid off years ago, the utility companies, the property tax office. I wrote down the names of the neighbors I trusted, the handyman who'd fixed the porch rail, the gardener who knew the rose beds by heart. Each night, I reviewed the list, imagining the chain of calls I'd make once the papers were served. I could see it as clearly as the harbor at low tide, the lights in this house burning for me again. Not as a guest, not as a tolerated presence, but as the owner who had never truly left. I moved through the days slowly, keeping my head bowed just enough to seem small, keeping my smile warm enough to seem harmless. They thought I was winding down, settling into some quiet surrender, but in the quiet, I was winding up. And with each detail locked into place, the question pressed closer, not if I would act, but when, a week later. The table was set again. Though not for me, Landon called it a family dinner. But the faces around it were mostly Brielle's friends, people who didn't know the history written into these walls. The conversation was all light banter and curated laughter, until Landon, glass in hand, leaned back in his chair and said, almost casually, "We've been talking to the bank about refinancing the house. Rates are too good to pass up. His house." The words landed like a pebble in deep water, sending ripples through every moment I'd bitten my tongue. I set my fork down, dabbed the corner of my mouth with my napkin, and rose from my seat. "Excuse me a moment," I said, my voice as even as the harbor tide. "Upstairs." I opened the drawer in my desk and took out the envelope Carmen had given me. Thick paper, crisp edges, weighty enough to change the air in the room it entered. When I came back, the conversation dipped into silence as I stopped beside Landon. I placed the envelope in front of him. "For you," I said. He slid a finger under the flap, eyes narrowing as he pulled out the first page. His smirk faltered, then disappeared entirely. The papers trembled in his hands as he read, "Full legal retraction of shared ownership, 30 days to vacate the premises." Across the table, Brielle's wineglass tilted, the stem rattling against the plate as she set it down too quickly. "What is this?" she asked, her voice thinner than I'd ever heard it. "It's a reminder," I said, looking at Landon, "that I never signed away what was mine." No one spoke. Even the clink of cutlery had stopped. Landon flipped through the remaining pages, as if searching for a loophole written in invisible ink. There was none. The deed, the retraction, the notice final, binding, undeniable. I sat back down, folded my napkin in my lap, and picked up my fork. My appetite hadn't returned, but my place at this table had. I chewed slowly, tasting not the food, but the certainty that the next move was theirs to make. The first attempt came before breakfast. Brielle appeared at the attic door, eyes glistening, voice trembling just enough to sound unrehearsed. "We can work this out," she said. "We don't have to leave. We can all stay. Make it work." I looked at her, seeing not the tears but the calculation behind them. "Brielle," I said gently, "you turned my home into a place where I was a guest in my own life. That's not something you fix by sharing a roof." By evening, Landon tried his version. No tears, just the voice he used when bargaining for a car. "Mom, we don't have to do this. You've got the house. We've got the house. We can make it a family thing again." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "A family thing. You moved me into the attic, locked my belongings away, and had dinner parties in my kitchen without telling me. You didn't want a family home, you wanted me out." He didn't have an answer for that. The next morning, I walked to the post office and sent a certified copy of the ownership papers to the bank, listed on the refinancing flyers I'd seen in the trash. If they'd already started the process, it would stop there. If they hadn't, they wouldn't dare now. By the time I came back, I saw Mrs. Keating from next door leaning over the garden fence. "It's nice seeing you in the garden again," she called. "Been too long?" I smiled, dusting the soil from my hands. "Feels good to be out here." Word travels quickly in a small coastal town. I noticed more waves from neighbors, longer pauses in conversations when I passed. Not pity, recognition. People can tell when someone's reclaiming ground they never should have lost. That night, the house was quieter, not peaceful, but watchful. I could feel them measuring their next move. wondering if I might still bend. I clipped a handful of roses from the garden and set them in a vase on the dining room table, letting their scent fill the air that, at last, belonged to me again. It began quietly. Without announcement, cardboard boxes appeared in the hallway. Some taped shut, others open with clothes spilling over the edges. I heard the dull thud of furniture legs being dragged across the floor and the muffled thump of cabinet doors closing. Brielle moved quickly, her footsteps sharp, her gaze fixed on the tasks in front of her. If she passed me in the hall, she didn't stop. She didn't meet my eyes. Once, I caught the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the doorway of what used to be the guest room, now stripped bare. Landon worked slower. He lingered over things, holding them for a beat too long before placing them in a box. One afternoon, I found him in the garden shed, holding a framed photo of us from years ago, me in a wide-brimmed hat, him no older than 10. Both of us grinning as we knelt in the dirt beside the first rose bush we'd planted. He looked up when he heard me. "I get it now," he said, his voice low, almost careful. "I hope you do." I answered. There was nothing else to add. He nodded once, as if sealing some unspoken agreement, then wrapped the frame in newspaper and slid it into a box. The days stretched with the rhythm of their departure drawers emptying, closets hollowing, spaces breathing again. There were no slammed doors, no raised voices, just the slow unwinding of their presence, like the tide pulling back from the shore. By the end of the week, their things were stacked neatly by the front door. A moving truck idled in the driveway, the air carrying the faint hum of its engine. Brielle stepped outside without a word. Sliding into the passenger seat, Landon lingered for a moment, glancing back toward the house, then followed. The door closed behind them with a soft click, and the truck rolled down the street until it was gone. I stood in the hallway, the echo of their footsteps fading, and let the stillness settle in. The air felt different, lighter, unburdened, and I knew it was time to decide what to bring back into these rooms. The first morning, alone, I opened every window and let the sea air drift in, carrying the sound of gulls and the faint tang of salt. Sunlight poured into corners that had been shadowed for too long. I started with the hallway, rehanging the family photos that had been boxed away Harold on the porch with his coffee. Landon as a boy in his Halloween pirate costume. The garden in full bloom one summer long ago. In the yard, I knelt in the soil where the roses used to grow, pressing new roots into the earth. Their thorns pricked my gloves, but I welcomed the sting. It meant something living was taking hold again. I unlocked Harold's old workshop for the first time in years, the smell of sawdust still clinging to the air, and began dusting the workbench, as if he might walk in at any moment and pick up where he left off. By the second week, the house no longer felt like a museum. It felt like mine. I started a weekly reading club for local teens, inviting them to sit in the living room with worn paperbacks and cocoa. Their voices filled the space with energy I hadn't realized I'd missed. One afternoon, Claire from next door wandered in, shyly offering to help me bake muffins. We measured flour, folded in blueberries, and filled the kitchen with the warm, sweet scent of cinnamon. When she left, she took a basket home to her mother, promising to come back next week. Later that evening, I hung the framed deed on the wall above the mantel. The paper was simple, black ink on white, but it carried the weight of every choice, every moment I'd refused to be erased. I stood there a while, the house quiet around me, the roses outside catching the late sun, the scent of cinnamon still lingering in the air. My reflection in the glass over the deed met my gaze steadily. I was always enough, I said aloud, the words settling into the walls like they had been waiting to hear them.